Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Paranormal Activity from 2009. Well, you're probably wondering why review this movie now. I mean, they're still making them and stuff like that, but it's not sort of a big anniversary year for the Paranormal Activities or anything. So, basically, I started YouTube in 2009, believe it or not. Everyone else I sort of knew at the time, or who was starting out, Deep Focus Lens started around that time too. She did a review. A bunch of people did reviews of it as it was playing certain cities and stuff like that, and like kind of expanding and becoming a big thing. And I didn't, and I always felt kind of stupid that I didn't do that, and I just never did. And every year I'd be like, oh, I should really just do it because everyone else has done it, and I felt a little embarrassed, and then I kind of like let an opportunity go. I mean, I saw El Super Beasto in theaters, which is rarer, but in general, less people care about that. So it's always been this thing over me that I'm like, I should eventually do Paranormal Activity. So I've been doing YouTube for so long, I kind of felt like that I would just do it this year because I wanted to sort of finally have done it. Basically, that's why I never reviewed the sequels. I guess if this had come out in 2009, I probably would have said something about how, probably would have been like, hey, I just got back from seeing Paranormal Activity, and what if you saw a movie that was not as good as the Blair Witch Project? I'm sure I would have opened with something like that. I would have been very blunt, and it probably wouldn't have been very good. And there'd be pictures all over me, and they wouldn't be very well laid out whatsoever. Not that I'm really good at doing anything like that now. But Paranormal Activity is an interesting film in that I can't think of any horror film in the 2000s or even in the sort of modern era, although I've been making stuff for a while, I guess. I don't know if this is even modern at this point. I've waited too long. But of any sort of kind of post 2000s or whatever film, there are very few or any that don't have, gore or, very extreme violence or like torture porn kind of stuff was going on at the time. And this movie is like, holy shit, a door closed and you jump up or like something moves a little and you're like, oh my God. And that is kind of the genius of this movie, which even when I did actually see this in 2010, I was like, okay, I should actually see this. I wasn't like butthurt. I was just like, oh, I sort of missed out on that and stuff. So when I did see it, I did feel like it is really a smartly made film, because to get an audience and a modern audience to sort of chill and be scared by a really simple thing is sort of amazing, really. That's something I've always liked about this film, because that is, I think, kind of a really hard thing to do filmmaking wise, to hold that suspense, that tension, that frightenness that goes on throughout it. I think that is there. It's kind of very old school haunted house kind of shit going on here, but there's a real kind of genius to it. Now I will say the director of this, Oren Peli, hardcore I think takes from Blair Witch. This I've always looked at as Blair Witch's Halloween, and this is Friday the 13th. This got to have the franchise. This didn't start found footage, but in a way it kind of did, I think. And that's the kind of sort of different thing is, yes, it took all these things from Blair Witch. Yes, it tried to do those things, but it definitely did restart found footage and made like every horror movie was found footage for a little bit, or handheld or like that, because of the success of this. Blair Witch like didn't cause, like, people have said, there were other Blair Witch kind of ripoffs, but it wasn't like the phenomenon, especially mainstreamized, what we got after this. There were only like a few, and then it became like the found footage thing like just took over. I mean, for better or for worse, but it really did inundate the 2010s with found footage stuff because of the success of this. The other thing I always feel about this film is you have, the whole idea of the film is this couple, Katie and Mika. They move into this new house, and Katie kind of feels like she's maybe being haunted or something's going on, and Mika sets up this camera, and through this camera they kind of try to document what's going on with her and the hauntings. And you see things like a ghost, and you have a psychic come, and how this slowly is getting worse and worse and scary as it goes on as Mika tries to document it. Now, if again, I think if I had reviewed this in 2009, and I think most people be like, oh, they always have to have excuses to have the camera on or recording and stuff like that. The one thing, and I do remember watching this the first time and feeling that way and going like, oh, of course, in found footage, you always have to have some excuse. You have the camera with you. But in the modern age, with like people live streaming everything and stuff, like I totally, that washed away completely. I was like, man, it probably sucked holding the camera like that. Like now it's like so easy. Like when I'm filming something with my phone, like nobody notices. But back then, if you took out a camera, everybody like tenses up because they're like, oh, it's a camera. Now everyone's just so used to it. Just that's what's happened from 2009 to today. Like people are just so used to it, you don't even question it. So I'm actually surprised we don't have a ton of found footage currently. I'm sure there are like on Shudder and stuff, and I know like WNUF2 came out and stuff, but like in terms of like big horror movies, I'm actually surprised because you could probably get away with it way more just like on your phone and stuff. But at the time I remember that being a complaint, and with all of them really, it doesn't bug me as much. But the thing with these characters is Katie and Mika, who are played by Mika Sloat and Katie Featherston, is unlike, I think, the cast of the Blair Witch Project. And it sounds like they did very similar ways of like coming up with dialogue and coming up with all these things. Even though they did, I think this feels very kind of anonymous in a way. The way they react to things. I think it's also like comparing the two films only really hurts Paranormal Activity, because I think whereas Blair Witch has like these distinct personalities and they're making a film and they're documentarian, so like there's a reason they're holding the camera and they're going to the woods and all this stuff. This is in a house. It feels like, I don't know if the people who made the Blair Witch Project or the fictional characters, would have shopped at Target, but I know the people in Paranormal Activity would, and that's the difference to me. Like, it's very suburban, it's very ordinary, and I do actually think that like helped the appeal, because it felt like you could be there, anyone could be there, anyone could be in that situation. It felt very easy to go into, and I think that is there's sort of a genius in that, because it's very easy to attach yourselves to those things, because they just feel like, Joe Q American boy and Joe Q American girl. It's not, very average, very kind of normal people. Anytime I watch them, like, that is so easy to attach yourself and get into that narrative, and honestly, really just to understand them. You kind of don't need to know that much about them in a way, which I think is sort of a compliment on the direction and the screenwriting, but it also doesn't, it almost feels like it doesn't have a personality. It feels like you've seen this personality elsewhere before. So I get when people kind of thumb their nose at this, because it just doesn't, like, you think of a major horror film that caused a big thing, you think of your Halloween, you think of your Night of the Living Dead, you think of various films, any horror film that has a kind of that has real staying power, you think of the personality. And I do think this film works effectively, but it is sort of, and it is really good horror film and stuff, but it sort of doesn't work in that way, which is really interesting that it did so well. It was originally shot independently, and then Paramount bought it, a thing they similarly did with Friday the 13th. They don't do a lot, although I remember lots of people having indie film seminars saying studios would do that now, and I was like, dude, this happened like twice, and once was Friday the 13th, and once was this, and I don't think they really don't do it ever. They did reshoot the ending. I watched the original ending. I sort of actually like the original ending, but whatever, and apparently cut some scenes and added some stuff, did very minor things. This cost less than the Blair Witch Project also. It's also interesting, Oren Peli, much like the Blair Witch directors, didn't really go on to like a huge directorial career. I know he helped with like things like the Chernobyl Diaries, and he helped with the Paranormal Activity franchise, and he did eventually direct, but much like the Blair Witch guys, it like went kind of a smaller release, unfortunately, which is surprising. Like he had such an impact with this film. I think this film came along at the right time, and there's a lot of horror reboots, things like that, but it's a good audience film, and I do think this film works like if you're watching it by yourself, but it very much works with a crowd as well, which is something that I think hurt Blair Witch, actually. I was around that Halloween where I like got to be on VHS right in time for Halloween, And man, did that not work out for Halloween parties. That is not a Halloween party movie, but it wasn't designed to be. This feels like they sort of expected you to. You know, I am surprised that the director didn't go on to more. I am also surprised we didn't get as many. It felt like when I'd see a found footage thing, there would be action scenes and gore and stuff like that. But I think what works about this is how effective it is as just doing very kind of simple scares. And I think that's the one thing I've always really respected. Obviously, it gets into more things, and this becomes a larger franchise, and this is actually in the middle of the franchise because of time travel, and they've made prequels, and somehow this is like Star Wars A New Hope. I'm confused, but whatever. I think it's just, I'm really just looking at this. I'm a little curious about more of the franchise when I looked into it. Like, oh, that does sound interesting. And I've only seen 1 and 2, which I didn't really like 2. Though I've heard good things about 3 and other ones. I think I should have done this in 2009. Think how much bigger I'd be now. Probably not. But it's always been kind of, it's not that this was a challenging film, it was just like I never did it, and I was like, this is the year, so that's why I'm doing it. I don't think anyone was waiting all this time. If you were, leave a comment, I'd love to know. But most people, I don't think, noticed that I hadn't reviewed any Paranormal Activity films. But this, I still find this film enjoyable. I had fun with it. I still get like tense and a little scared by it. I never jumped up too much or anything like that. It doesn't fully scare me, but you know, I appreciate how it's able to scare you with the simplest things, just by like the kind of ongoing tension and the frightenness and the feeling that anything could pop out of you at any time in that darkness, and using the kind of basics of horror and what humanity is scared of in a way that I think most people don't want to be that obvious, don't want to be that kind of transparent in what it's doing, and don't want to be that sort of lame as this couple is. But I don't think Paranormal Activity cares about that, and in a sense I think that's what makes it kind of cool. I don't know if I'd like, you know, it does feel anonymous, it does feel like it doesn't have a personality, but it feels that way in sort of a genius way, like that was the intent. And I kind of have always really liked that about it. I think that's actually something that very few people would intentionally do, that in such a way that you kind of get a sense that they hit that mark almost too perfectly with this one. And too perfectly, in fact, that I think a lot of people wish they could have gotten close to what this film achieved. Maybe there are better found footage films. Maybe there's a better found footage film that came out 10 years before it. But I still find it to be a pretty great little horror, a pretty great kind of simple horror film that can kind of, you know, maybe is talking about everyone and maybe is talking about no one. But if you're getting scared by a door just moving a little bit, I think that's a neat little haunted house spooky accomplishment that most horror movies couldn't really ever pull off. So if you've seen Paranormal Activity and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.